The scent of roasted rosemary chicken, Rose's signature dish, usually filled her small house with a warmth that felt like a hug. It was her 80th birthday, and the table was laden with food, a testament to a life of loving and being loved. Sunlight streamed through the dining room window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and catching the silver in my mother's hair as she laughed at something my son Ben said. He was only 7, all bright eyes and untamed curiosity, the kind of child who could make a stone statue smile. My sister, Lisa, sat across from me. She was quieter than usual, a small, polite smile fixed on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. We had drifted over the years, not from any single dramatic event, but through a slow, silent erosion of shared moments. Life had pulled us in different directions, or perhaps we had pushed ourselves apart, brick by brick, until a wall stood where a bridge used to be. Still, for our mother, we maintained a fragile peace, a carefully constructed illusion of the happy family we once were. Rose, radiant in a pale blue dress, sat at the head of the table. She looked at us, her children and grandchild, and her eyes welled with a gentle, happy tear. "Having you all here," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "is the only gift I could ever want." I reached across the table to squeeze her hand, my heart aching with a mixture of love for her and a quiet sorrow for the fractures she chose not to see. Lisa offered another of her tight smiles. The conversation was light, a gentle volley of school anecdotes from Ben, neighborhood gossip from my mother, and my own carefully neutral contributions about work. We were navigating the shallow waters, avoiding the deep, dark currents that ran beneath the surface of our family. Then, in the way only a child can, Ben shattered the calm. He had just finished a story about his soccer practice when he turned his innocent gaze toward my sister. "Aunt Lisa," he began, his voice clear and loud in the cozy room. "Grandma was really sick last year, right?" I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "Ben, honey, let's talk about something else," I said quickly, trying to steer him away. But Ben was persistent. He looked from my mother to Lisa, his brow furrowed with genuine confusion. "Mom said Grandma was in the hospital for a long time, so—" He turned his full attention back to Lisa, who had just lifted a piece of potato to her lips. "Why didn't you visit her when she was sick?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The cheerful chatter ceased as if a switch had been flipped. My mother's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of old pain. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick marking a second of suffocating silence. Lisa froze. Her fork stopped midair. A single, perfectly roasted potato balanced on the tines. Her face, already pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color. Her eyes, wide and fixed on her nephew, were a swirl of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Shock, fear, and something that looked terrifyingly like raw grief. It was as if Ben's innocent words had been a key, unlocking a door to a room she had kept sealed shut for years. For a moment, no one breathed. The fork clattered against Lisa's plate, the sharp sound echoing the sudden tension that had gripped the room. She lowered her hand to her lap, her knuckles white as she clenched her napkin. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small, choked sound escaped. Her eyes darted toward me, a silent, desperate plea for rescue. My own heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt a flush of anger at Ben for his untempered question, immediately followed by a wave of guilt. How could I be angry at him? He was a child. I was the adult who had failed to prepare him, who had naively hoped we could skate over the thinnest of ice without it cracking beneath us. "Ben," I said, my voice coming out firmer than I intended, "that's not a polite question. We don't ask people things like that." He looked at me, his face a picture of bewilderment. "But why? I just wanted to know." "Because it's private," I insisted, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Just as the situation threatened to unravel completely, Rose, my mother, acted. She placed her hand gently over Lisa's, which was still trembling in her lap. Then, she turned her gaze to her grandson, and the love in her eyes was so profound it seemed to calm the very air in the room. "It's all right, Helen," she said softly, never taking her eyes off Ben. "It is a fair question." She took a slow breath. "You know, Ben, when people get very sick, it can be very scary for the people who love them. It was scary for your mommy, wasn't it, Helen?" I nodded, unable to speak, remembering the long, sterile-smelling nights at the hospital, the constant beeping of machines, the fear a constant cold companion. "And it was scary for your Aunt Lisa, too," Rose continued, her voice a gentle, soothing balm. "Sometimes, when people are that scared, they can't bring themselves to go to the scary place. It doesn't mean they don't love the person who is sick. In fact, sometimes it means they love them so much. The thought of seeing them in pain is just too much to bear. Does that make any sense? Ben's face softened with a dawning understanding. He looked from his grandmother to his aunt. So you were just too scared? He asked Lisa directly, his tone no longer accusatory, but filled with a childish empathy. Lisa couldn't form a word. She could only manage a slow, jerky nod, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. With that, she pushed her chair back abruptly, murmured, "Excuse me," and fled the room. We heard her footsteps hurry down the hall and the click of the bathroom door shutting. The three of us sat in silence. The perfect birthday dinner was in ruins. Rose's explanation, meant to soothe, had instead confirmed the one thing Ben's question had unearthed: a deep, unaddressed wound. My mother sighed, a heavy, weary sound, and the sparkle she'd had all day was gone, replaced by the familiar shadow of a sadness she carried for her fractured family. I knew in that moment that the carefully constructed peace was over. The wall we had built between us hadn't been strong enough to keep the truth out. It had only served to trap the pain inside. The silence Lisa left behind was somehow heavier than the one that had preceded her exit. Ben looked down at his plate, his appetite apparently vanished. He pushed a carrot around with his fork, the small scraping sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He knew he had stepped on a landmine. He just didn't have the map to know where it had been buried. "Did I make Aunt Lisa sad?" he asked, his voice small. Rose reached out and ruffled his hair. "You asked an honest question, my love. Sometimes honesty is a bit of a surprise, that's all. Why don't you go and see what's on the television for a little while? I think your mom and I need to talk for a minute." Ben, looking relieved to be excused, slid off his chair and scurried out of the room. A moment later, the tinny sound of a cartoon theme song drifted in from the living room, a surreal counterpoint to the strained atmosphere at the dinner table. Rose folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate with weary precision. "Well, Helen," she said, not looking at me, "it seems we're long overdue for a real conversation." "What is there to say?" I asked, the frustration I felt for years bubbling to the surface. "She didn't come, Mom. You were in the ICU for 2 weeks. We didn't know. And she didn't come. She didn't call. Nothing. You can explain it to Ben as fear, and maybe that's part of it. But it was more than that. It was cruel." The memory was still raw, a festering wound I had tried to ignore. I remembered calling Lisa from a sterile hospital corridor, my voice cracking as I told her the doctors weren't sure what was happening, that Mom was unresponsive. I remembered her stilted, brief replies. "I see. I hope she gets better." Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she offer to come. Each day, my hope that she would appear dwindled, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I was there, holding Mom's hand, talking to doctors, sleeping in a lumpy vinyl chair, while she was, where? Living her life, apparently, unburdened. "Fear can make people cruel, Helen," Rose said, her voice still gentle, but with an edge of steel. "It can make them selfish. It can make them shut down. You're not wrong to be angry. Your feelings are valid. You carried a heavy burden all by yourself." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes, the same deep brown as my own, were filled with a profound sadness. "But holding on to that anger is a burden too. It's been a wall between you and your sister for a long time. And I think it's been a wall inside of her too. Maybe it's time to find out what's on the other side of it." I looked down the hallway toward the closed bathroom door. A thin line of light was visible underneath. Every instinct I had was to stay put, to protect myself with the armor of my righteous anger. It was easier than facing the messy, unpredictable truth of Lisa's actions. But then I looked at my mother, at the plea in her eyes on her 80th birthday, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger was exhausting. The wall was heavy. Maybe it was time to put it down. "Okay, Mom," I sighed, pushing my own chair back. "Okay." I walked down the hallway, each step feeling like a concession. The floorboards creaked under my feet, announcing my approach. I stopped outside the bathroom door, my hand hovering over the cool brass knob. I could hear a faint sound from within, the choked, ragged sound of someone trying to cry without making a noise. And for the first time in over a year, a flicker of something other than anger sparked in my heart. It was a faint, fragile thing, but it was there. It was concern. I took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door. "Lisa? It's me." The muffled crying stopped instantly. Silence. For a moment, I thought she might just ignore me, wait for me to give up and walk away. It would have been the easier option for both of us. "Go away, Helen," her voice came, thick and strained. "I'm not going away." I said, my voice firmer than I expected. We need to talk. Mom's worried. Ben is confused, and I'm tired of this, Lisa. I'm just so tired. I waited. More silence. I could picture her on the other side of the door, leaning against the sink, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, seeing a stranger. Finally, I heard the faint click of the lock. The door opened a crack, and one of Lisa's red-rimmed eyes peered out at me. She looked haggard, her carefully composed mask from dinner completely gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded misery. She opened the door wider and stepped back, a gesture of reluctant invitation. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The bathroom was small, and felt even smaller with the two of us in it. The air was thick with the scent of Rose's floral soap and Lisa's quiet despair. She stood with her back to the sink, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist as if holding herself together. "What do you want to say, Helen?" she asked, her voice low and brittle. "That I'm a terrible daughter? A horrible sister? A monster who didn't visit her own mother in the hospital? Go on, say it. It's nothing I haven't been telling myself for the past year." The bitterness in her tone was a shield, and the old, familiar anger flared in my chest. It would have been so easy to unleash it, to confirm all her self-recriminations, to tell her exactly how it felt to be alone in that hospital, praying for a miracle while she was nowhere to be found. But my mother's words echoed in my mind. Fear can make people cruel. I looked at my sister, at the genuine anguish etched on her face, and I made a choice. I set the anger down. "I don't want to say any of that," I said, my voice softer now. "I just want to understand." That's what Ben wanted too. He just wanted to understand. Help me understand, Lisa. Because Mom's right. You were scared. I can see that now. But what were you so scared of? My question seemed to bypass her defenses. Her brittle anger crumbled, and her body sagged as if a string had been cut. The tears that had been held back began to fall again. Silently at first, then in heaving, ragged sobs that shook her entire frame. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her head buried in her hands. I hesitated for only a second before sliding down to sit on the floor across from her, the worn bath mat soft beneath me. I didn't touch her. I just waited. The space between us, which had once been a chasm of anger and misunderstanding, now felt like a shared, sacred silence. After several long minutes, her sobs subsided into shudders. She lifted her head, wiping at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. "It wasn't the hospital," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I mean, it was, but that wasn't it. Not really." She took a shaky breath and looked at me, her eyes holding a pain so deep it startled me. "I was scared of her dying," she said. "But that's not what kept me away." She paused, gathering her strength. "The last time I saw her, before she got sick, we had a fight. A terrible one. The worst we've ever had. I said things, Helen. Awful, unforgivable things. And the last words I ever said to her face were full of rage." Her voice broke on a sob. "I couldn't go to that hospital. Because what if she died? What if she died and the last thing I ever gave her was my anger? I couldn't face it. I couldn't." Her confession hung in the small bathroom, sucking the air out of the space. Of all the reasons I had imagined for her absence, selfishness, cowardice, a simple lack of love, this was not one of them. A fight. It seemed so trivial, and yet, hearing the raw agony in her voice, I understood it was anything but. My own anger, which I had been clinging to like a shield for over a year, evaporated completely. In its place, a hollow ache of regret began to form. I had been so wrapped up in my own pain, my own solitary burden, that I had never once considered hers. I saw the situation only through the lens of my own experience. I was the good daughter, sitting by our mother's bedside, while she was the bad daughter, conspicuously absent. The world was simple, black and white, but it wasn't. It was a messy, complicated tangle of gray. "A fight?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did you fight about?" Lisa hugged her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. "Do you remember when I lost my job? The one at the design firm?" I nodded. Of course, I remembered. It had happened about a month before Mom got sick. Lisa had been devastated. "I didn't lose it, Helen," she said, looking at the floor tiles. "I quit. I hated it. The pressure, the long hours. It was draining the life out of me. I wanted to do something else. I had this idea, to go back to school, to study landscape architecture. It's what I've always wanted to do." She finally looked up at me, a flicker of the old passion in her eyes. "I came over to tell Mom. I was so excited. I thought she'd be happy for me, but she wasn't." Lisa's voice trembled. She said I was being irresponsible, throwing away a perfectly good career. She said I was being flighty, just like Dad was. The mention of our father struck a nerve. He had left when we were teenagers, a restless spirit who could never quite settle down, always chasing a new dream over the horizon. It was the deepest wound in our mother's life. She didn't mean it, I said, though a part of me knew she probably had, in the heat of the moment. It doesn't matter, Lisa said, shaking her head. I just snapped. I told her she was so afraid of turning into her own mother that she'd spent her whole life trying to control ours. I said she couldn't stand to see me choose a different path, a path that might actually make me happy, because she had never allowed herself to do the same. Her face crumpled. I told her she was bitter, and then I walked out. The next thing I knew, you were calling me from the hospital. We sat in the silence that followed, the weight of her words settling between us. I finally understood the paralyzing fear she must have felt. It wasn't just the fear of our mother dying. It was the terror of her dying with those toxic, hateful words as their final exchange. While I had been praying for Mom to live, Lisa had been praying for a chance to take back her own last words. So you just stayed away, I said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I punished myself, she whispered. Every day she was in that hospital, I woke up and told myself I didn't deserve to be there. I didn't deserve to see her. How could I face her or you after what I'd said? So I just shut down. It was easier to pretend it wasn't happening than to face the monster I believed I had become. I reached out then, my hand closing over hers where it rested on her knee. Her skin was cold. You're not a monster, Lisa, I said, and the sincerity in my own voice surprised me. You're my sister, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see any of this. For the first time, she looked at me not as an accuser, but as an ally. A small, watery smile touched her lips. I'm sorry too, Helen, for leaving you to handle all of it alone. That was my fear talking, not me. The wall was gone. In its place was a fragile, tentative bridge. It wasn't strong yet, but it was there. We had found our way back to the same side. The confession hung in the small bathroom, a shocking, painful truth that rearranged the entire narrative of the past year. I had built a story in my mind with clear-cut roles. I was the dutiful daughter. She was the neglectful one. But her version was not about neglect. It was about shame and a profound, paralyzing guilt. A fight? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What could you possibly have fought about that was so bad? Lisa pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller, as if the memory itself was a physical weight. It was about everything, she said, her gaze fixed on the floral pattern of the floor tiles. My life. The fact that I'm 42, unmarried, no kids. The fact that I quit my stable teaching job to try and open a small art gallery that's barely breaking even. It all came out. She took a shaky breath. It was a few weeks before she collapsed. I had come over for dinner, just the two of us. She started in on me the usual way. Are you seeing anyone, dear? It's not too late, you know. I know she meant well, but that day, I was just so tired of it. I'd just gotten a final rejection for a small business loan. I was feeling like a complete failure. Her voice cracked. I snapped. I told her to stop trying to live her life through me. I told her that maybe her perfect little life of being a wife and mother wasn't everyone's dream. And then I said it. She squeezed her eyes shut, and a fresh wave of tears tracked through the drying paths of the old ones. I told her that maybe I didn't want a family because I saw how much being a mother had cost her, how she gave up everything, her own dreams, everything. I asked her if she ever regretted it. The cruelty of the question struck me. To our mother, whose entire identity was wrapped up in her love for us, it would have been a dagger to the heart. She just looked at me, Lisa continued, her voice ragged. She didn't get angry. She just got this incredibly hurt look on her face. And she said so quietly, I never regretted you or Helen for a second. My only regret is that I've somehow made you feel like my love is a burden. And then she went upstairs. I just left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't apologize. A week later, she whispered, you called me from the hospital. The story settled in the space between us. The anger I had nursed for a year felt pointless now. A misguided arrow shot at the wrong target. I hadn't been the only one in pain. While I was dealing with the fear of her potential death, Lisa was wrestling with the horrifying possibility that she had caused a wound so deep in our mother's heart that it could never be healed, and that she might never have the chance to atone for it. Her silence hadn't been callousness. It had been a form of self-flagellation. She had sentenced herself to exile. Oh, Lisa, I breathed. the words carrying all the empathy I had withheld for so long. You should have told me. She looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and exhaustion. How could I? How could I admit that to you when you were being so strong, so perfect? Calling me from the hospital, holding everything together. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, I can't be there. I'm too busy drowning in my own guilt because I was a monster to her. You would have hated me even more. I didn't hate you, I said, and as I said it, I realized it was true. I was angry, and I was hurt, and I was lonely, but I never hated you. I reached out then, and my hand closed over hers. Her skin was cold. We've been carrying two different sides of the same heavy stone, Lisa. Alone, and it's been crushing us both. A fragile understanding passed between us. The first genuine connection we'd had in years. The wall, built of my anger and her guilt, began to crumble. We weren't rivals in grief or duty. We were just two sisters who loved their mother and had gotten lost in their own pain. What do I do now, Helen? She asked, her voice sounding as young and lost as Ben's had at the dinner table. How can I ever fix this? We fix it together, I said, squeezing her hand. You don't have to do it alone anymore, but you have to talk to her. You have to tell her what you just told me. The idea was terrifying. I could see it in her eyes. It was one thing to confess to me in the cramped confines of a bathroom, but it was another entirely to face the person she had wronged. I can't, she whispered. She'll never look at me the same way. She already knows you're in pain, I countered gently. She sat at that table and defended you to her own grandson. Her love for you is bigger than a fight, Lisa. It's bigger than your guilt. You just have to trust that. I stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. She was unsteady, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. We looked at each other in the mirror, our faces blotchy and tear-stained, a mess of shared grief and nascent hope. Together? She asked, her voice trembling. Together, I promised. Walking out of the bathroom was like stepping into a different world. The hallway felt wider, the air lighter. We walked side by side, a silent, united front. As we entered the dining room, Rose looked up. Her expression wasn't one of impatience, but of deep, loving concern. She saw us, our hands clasped between us, and her eyes softened with relief. Ben was asleep on the sofa in the living room, the muted colors of a cartoon flickering across his peaceful face. The table, with its half-eaten birthday feast, stood as a testament to the dinner that had fractured and perhaps saved us. Lisa stopped at the edge of the table, unable to come closer. I gave her hand a final squeeze of encouragement before letting go. Mom, Lisa began, her voice still shaky but clear. I am so sorry. For dinner, for this year, for everything. Rose simply watched her, her face unreadable, waiting. And then, Lisa told her, she retold the story of their last fight, her voice cracking as she repeated the awful things she had said. She spoke of her overwhelming guilt, of the shame that had kept her away, of the fear that our mother would die with the memory of her daughter's anger as their final exchange. She held nothing back. She laid her broken, guilty heart at our mother's feet. When she finished, she was crying again, but this time it was a quiet, cleansing cry. The dining room was utterly still. Rose was the one to break the silence. Oh, my Lisa, she said, and her voice was filled with an ocean of love. She stood up and walked to my sister, and she pulled her into a hug. Lisa collapsed against her, sobbing into her mother's shoulder like a child. Did you think a fight could erase 42 years of love? Rose murmured, stroking Lisa's hair. Did you think my love was so fragile? She held Lisa at arm's length and looked into her eyes. That fight, it broke my heart, yes. Not because of what you said about my life, but because I saw how much pain you were in. My words hurt you. I pushed you. I am the one who is sorry, my child. I never wanted my love to feel like a cage. It was a breathtaking moment of grace. My mother, the wronged party, was asking for forgiveness. In that instant, she gave Lisa the one thing she needed most: absolution. She lifted the burden of guilt from Lisa's shoulders, a burden Lisa had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I felt my own tears begin to fall, tears of relief, of gratitude. I went to them and wrapped my arms around them both. We stood there for a long time, a tangle of arms and apologies and forgiveness. The three of us huddled together in the warm light of the dining room. The smell of the cold rosemary chicken still hung in the air, but it was no longer the scent of a ruined celebration. It was the scent of home. We didn't finish the meal. Instead, we moved to the living room, leaving the dishes for later. I sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa where Ben slept. Lisa and my mother sat on the couch close together, holding hands. The conversation that followed was quiet, hesitant at first, then flowing. We talked about the year that was lost, filling in the gaps, sharing the stories we had lived apart. We talked about Lisa's gallery, about my work, about Ben's soccer games. We talked about the future, not with grand promises, but with a simple, shared understanding that we would face it together. Later, as I was getting ready to drive us home, Lisa helped me carry a sleeping Ben to the car. "Thank you, Helen," she said, as we tucked a blanket around him in the back seat. "For what?" I asked. "For coming to the door," she said simply. We stood for a moment under the porch light, the cool night air a pleasant shock after the emotion of the evening. The wall was gone. In its place, the first foundation stones of a new bridge were being laid. It would take time to build it strong again, but we had the blueprint now. It was made of honesty, of forgiveness, and of the stubborn, resilient love that had been there all along, just waiting to be seen. My mother's 80th birthday hadn't been the celebration she had expected, but it had given her the only gift she truly wanted. It had brought her daughters back to her. It had brought them back to each other.